In the quiet hours before dawn, when the minarets of Istanbul stand silhouetted against a sky the color of pearl and lavender, there exists a moment of perfect stillness. The waters of the Bosphorus lap gently against ancient stone walls, their rhythmic whispers carrying secrets from centuries past. It is in these hushed moments, when the city sleeps and dreams mingle with the morning mist, that we begin our journey into a world that has all but vanished from memory. The year could be 1550, or perhaps 1750. In the empire that stretched across 3 continents, time moved differently then, measured not by the frantic pace of modern life, but by the gentle cadence of prayer calls, the seasonal rhythms of harvest and trade, and the simple, sacred ritual of breaking the night's fast. As the first pale fingers of sunlight touch the domes and terraces of the great city, the aroma of freshly baked bread begins to drift through narrow cobblestone streets, carried on air still cool with the breath of night. This is the story of breakfast in the Ottoman Empire, but it is more than that. It is the story of how a civilization nourished itself, both in body and soul, through the simple yet profound act of sharing the morning meal. These were not the hurried affairs we know today, consumed standing at kitchen counters or grabbed from drive-through windows. These were moments of connection, ritual, meaning that defined the rhythm of an entire empire's day. Picture, if you will, the gentle awakening of a household in Old Stumble. The servants move quietly through corridors still touched by shadow, their soft footsteps echoing off marble floors as they prepare the morning's offerings. In the kitchen, where copper pots gleam like captured sunlight, the day's first fire has been kindled. The scent of burning olive wood mingles with the yeasty perfume of rising dough, creating an olfactory symphony that speaks of comfort, tradition, and the eternal human need for sustenance. But what did breakfast mean in this vast empire that once ruled from the gates of Vienna to the shores of Yemen? How did a sultan break his fast? And how did it differ from the morning meal of a humble craftsman in distant Aleppo or a farmer in the rolling hills of Anatolia? These questions lead us into a world where food was never merely fuel for the body, but a language through which people expressed their faith, their social position, their connection to the divine, and their place in the great tapestry of imperial life. The Ottoman Empire, at its height, was a marvel of diversity and sophistication. Within its borders lived Turks and Arabs, Greeks and Armenians, Bulgarians and Serbs, Jews and Kurds, each bringing their own culinary traditions, their own ways of greeting the morning, their own understanding of what it meant to begin the day with gratitude and sustenance. Yet somehow, through the alchemy of imperial culture, these diverse traditions blended and evolved into something uniquely Ottoman, breakfast culture that reflected both the cosmopolitan nature of the empire and its deep spiritual roots. As we embark on this gentle exploration, imagine yourself walking through the morning streets of 16th century Istanbul. The stone beneath your feet is still cool from the night, and overhead the sky gradually lightens from deep purple to soft rose to the warm gold of early sunshine. From behind wooden shutters comes the quiet murmur of families gathering around. Low tables, the soft clink of glass teacups, the whispered prayers of gratitude for another day's provision. This is not a story of grand feasts or elaborate banquets, though we will visit the palace kitchens where such spectacles were prepared. Instead, this is an intimate tale of everyday sustenance, of the quiet moments that shaped the lives of millions across centuries and continents. It is the story of bread still warm from communal ovens, of cheese white as morning clouds, of olives that carried the taste of Mediterranean sunshine, and of honey that connected the breakfast table to the wildflowers of distant meadows. In our modern world, breakfast has become something almost mechanical, a necessary interruption before the day's true business begins. But in the Ottoman Empire, the morning meal was a ceremony, a meditation, a moment of connection with family, faith, and the natural world. To understand Ottoman breakfast is to understand something essential about how this great civilization saw itself, how it defined community, hospitality, and the good life. The morning call to prayer echoes across the sleeping city now, the muezzins, voice floating over rooftops and courtyards like a benediction. In response, the city begins its gentle awakening. Shutters open to reveal glimpses of families gathering around their morning tables. Children's voices mingle with the soft conversations of their elders. The aroma of brewing coffee, still a relative novelty in this imagined morning centuries, ago begins to compete with the established perfumes of tea, bread, and fresh herbs. As we settle into this exploration together, let the rhythm of these ancient mornings slow your breathing, soften your thoughts, and prepare your mind for a journey through time. We will visit palace kitchens and humble village homes, bustling morning markets, and quiet monastery refectories. We will taste foods that have vanished from the earth and discover how flavors that still grace our tables today carry within them the essence of an empire that once stretched from the Danube to the Nile. The sun is fully risen now over our imagined Istanbul, painting the waters of the Golden Horn with liquid light. Fishing boats return with their night's catch, their sails billowing gently in the morning breeze. The city's breakfast has begun, and with it, our journey into the forgotten world of Ottoman morning meals, where every bite told a story, every meal was a prayer, and every dawn brought new possibilities for connection, contemplation, and quiet joy. To understand the true nature of breakfast in the Ottoman Empire, we must first release ourselves from our modern assumptions about what a morning meal should be. In our contemporary world, breakfast often carries the burden of being the most important meal of the day, a phrase that would have puzzled an Ottoman household, where each meal was considered a gift from Allah, equally blessed and equally significant in its own time and place. The very concept of breakfast in Ottoman society was intimately woven into the fabric of Islamic life, where the rhythm of eating was governed not by convenience or nutrition science, but by spiritual practice and communal harmony. The word breakfast itself implies the breaking of a fast, and in the Ottoman world, this breaking was never taken lightly. Each night's sleep was seen as a small death, each morning's awakening as a resurrection, and the first food to touch. The lips carried with it the weight of gratitude for another day of life. In the households of the empire, morning began not with the harsh sound of modern alarms, but with the gentle call to prayer that floated across neighborhoods like a silk scarf carried on the wind. This call was not merely a religious obligation, but a communal timekeeper, a shared signal that connected each household to every other, each individual to the greater rhythm of the empire's spiritual life. After the dawn prayer, as families gathered around low wooden tables or spread carpets, the morning meal became their first collective act of the day. The structure of Ottoman breakfast reflected the empire's understanding of balance and moderation. Unlike the heavy morning meals that would later characterize European traditions, or the light rushed affairs of our modern era, Ottoman breakfast sought a middle path. It was substantial enough to provide strength for the morning's work, yet light enough to leave room for the spiritual and intellectual pursuits that the culture valued. The meal was designed to nourish without overwhelming, to satisfy without inducing the lethargy that might interfere with prayer or contemplation. Perhaps most importantly, breakfast in the Ottoman world was never a solitary affair. The very architecture of Ottoman homes, with their communal courtyards and interconnected living spaces, reflected a culture that valued shared experience over individual convenience. Families ate together, seated on cushions around circular tables barely a foot high, their proximity creating an intimacy that made conversation natural and silence comfortable. Children learned not just what to eat, but how to eat, when to speak, how to show respect for both the food and their elders. The timing of breakfast followed natural rhythms rather than arbitrary schedules. In summer, when dawn came early and cool, the meal might be taken in courtyards under the open sky, where family members could feel the morning breeze and watch the day's light strengthen. In winter, breakfast moved to interior rooms warmed by braziers, where the family gathered closer together, their breath visible in the cool air. The warmth of shared food and conversation providing comfort against the season's chill. Social status played a role in breakfast, but not in the way we might expect. While the foods available to a sultan's table certainly differed from those on a farmer's mat, the basic elements remained remarkably consistent across all levels of Ottoman society. Bread, Cheese, olives, and tea formed the foundation of virtually every morning meal, from the humblest village home to the grandest palace chamber. What varied was not so much the type of food as its quality presentation, and the number of accompanying dishes that might enhance the basic elements. This consistency reflected one of the Ottoman Empire's most remarkable characteristics: its ability to create unity without uniformity. A merchant in Damascus and a craftsman in Belgrade might begin their day with essentially the same foods. Prepared in similar ways, eaten with similar rituals of gratitude and family connection, this shared breakfast culture became one of the invisible threads that held the vast empire together, creating a sense of common identity that transcended linguistic, ethnic, and regional differences. The preparation of breakfast was itself a meditation, particularly for the women who typically oversaw this daily ritual. Rising before the rest of the household, they would move through familiar routines that connected them to their mothers and grandmothers, to traditions that stretched back through generations. The kneading of dough for fresh bread, the arrangement of cheese and olives on simple wooden plates, the careful brewing of tea in small glasses that caught and held the morning light like amber jewels. Each action was both practical necessity and spiritual practice. Religious considerations shaped every aspect of the morning meal. The foods chosen were those permitted by Islamic law, prepared according to religious guidelines, and consumed with prayers that acknowledged their divine source. But beyond these formal requirements, breakfast carried deeper spiritual significance. The sharing of food was seen as an act that brought families closer to the divine, a daily reminder of God's provision and the interdependence of all creation. Seasonal variations added rhythm and anticipation to the breakfast cycle. Spring brought fresh herbs and early vegetables that had been absent through the winter months. Summer offered fruits that could be preserved for the darker seasons ahead. Autumn provided nuts and late harvests that would sustain families through the cold months. Winter breakfast became a celebration of stored abundance, of human foresight and divine blessing combined in jars of preserves, wheels of aged cheese, and carefully hoarded supplies of tea and spices. The pace of breakfast reflected the Ottoman understanding of time itself. Unlike our modern relationship with time as something to be conquered or maximized, Ottoman culture viewed time as something to be inhabited, experienced, and respected. Breakfast was not hurried through to reach more important activities. Breakfast was itself an important activity, worthy of attention, care, and presence. Family members did not eat while reading newspapers or checking phones, but engaged with each other and with their food, creating space for conversation, reflection, connection. This different relationship with time extended to the foods themselves. Rather than seeking convenience, Ottoman breakfast celebrated foods that required time and attention. Bread was baked fresh each morning or obtained warm from neighborhood ovens. Tea was brewed carefully, with attention to temperature and steeping time. Even simple elements like cheese and olives were chosen with care, their flavors considered and appreciated rather than merely consumed. As we move deeper into our exploration of Ottoman breakfast traditions, we carry with us this understanding of what breakfast meant to this remarkable civilization. It was simultaneously mundane and sacred, individual and communal, simple and sophisticated. It was a daily practice that shaped family relationships, reinforced social bonds, and connected each household to the rhythms of faith and season that governed life in one of history's great empires. In understanding this, we begin to appreciate not just what Ottomans ate for breakfast, but why those morning meals mattered so deeply to the culture that created and sustained them across centuries and continents. If we could step into any Ottoman home at breakfast time, from the humblest village dwelling to the most magnificent palace apartment, we would find at the center of every morning table the same essential element: bread. But this was not bread as we might know it today, mass-produced, in uniform, wrapped in plastic, and stored on supermarket shelves. This was bread that carried within its golden crust the essence of the community that created it. Bread that connected each meal to the ancient rhythms of grain and harvest, fire and sustenance. The significance of bread in Ottoman culture reached far beyond mere nutrition. In Islamic tradition, bread was considered a divine gift, so sacred that dropping a piece on the ground required picking it up and kissing it before setting it aside. This reverence permeated Ottoman breakfast culture, where bread was not simply consumed but honored, where each loaf represented a connection between human labor and divine blessing. Between the earth that grew the grain and the hands that shaped the dough, the variety of breads that graced Ottoman breakfast tables reflected the empire's remarkable diversity. In Istanbul, the morning air carried the aroma of simit, those ring-shaped breads encrusted with sesame seeds that vendors carried through the streets on wooden trays, calling out their wares in voices that became part of the city's morning symphony. The simit's golden surface gleamed with the oil that had been brushed on before baking, and its interior was light and slightly chewy. It's perfect for tearing into pieces that could hold cheese or dip into honey. Pied represented another cornerstone of Ottoman breakfast bread, its boat-like shape making it perfect for holding other foods or for tearing into manageable pieces that could be shared around the family circle. The surface of fresh pied bore the distinctive dimpled pattern created by the baker's fingers, and its crust had a particular way of crackling when broken, releasing steam that carried the yeasty perfume of fermentation and the toasty fragrance of properly baked grain. In the eastern regions of the empire, lavash provided the morning's foundation, its paper-thin layers wrapping around cheese and herbs like edible silk. The preparation of lavash required particular skill, as the dough had to be rolled impossibly thin and baked on special curved griddles that gave it its characteristic flexibility and delicate texture. Families would often prepare lavash together, the process becoming a social activity that strengthened bonds while creating sustenance. The daily rhythm of bread production created its own temporal architecture within Ottoman communities. Before dawn, while most of the city still slept, bakers would already be at work, their ovens glowing like small suns in the pre-dawn darkness. The timing was crucial. Bread for the morning meal needed to be ready as families finished their dawn prayers and gathered for breakfast. This meant that bakers began their work in the deepest part of the night, their labor synchronized with the spiritual rhythms of their community. Neighborhood bakeries were more than commercial establishments. They were community institutions that played essential roles in daily life. Families would often bring their own prepared dough to be baked in the baker's superior ovens, creating a system that combined household preparation with professional expertise. The bakery became a gathering place where neighbors met, news was exchanged, and community relationships were maintained through the shared ritual of daily bread. The communal ovens that served many neighborhoods operated according to carefully negotiated schedules. Each family knew their appointed time, and the bakery hummed with activity as people arrived with their carefully shaped loaves, each marked with distinctive signs so they could be identified when baking was complete. Children were often sent to collect the family's bread, and they learned to recognize their own loaves among the dozens that might emerge from the ovens at the same time. The process of bread making itself was considered both art and meditation. The preparation began with the selection of grain. It's often purchased directly from farmers or trusted merchants who could guarantee its quality and purity. The grain was ground into flour, using methods that preserved its nutritional value and flavor, creating varieties of flour that differed significantly from the refined products we know today. This flour retained more of the wheat's natural character, producing breads with more complex flavors and denser, more satisfying textures. Yeast was treated with the respect due to a living substance that performed what seemed like miraculous transformations. Wild yeasts were captured and maintained through sourdough starters that might be passed down through generations, each family's starter carrying unique characteristics that influenced the flavor and texture of their bread. The care of these starters was often entrusted to the most experienced bread maker in the household, usually an elder woman whose knowledge of fermentation, timing, and temperature control came from decades of daily practice. The mixing of dough was a physical meditation that connected the bread maker to the ingredients and to the long tradition of human bread making. Hands became sensitive instruments that could detect the subtle changes in texture that indicated proper gluten development, adequate hydration, or readiness for shaping. This tactile knowledge could not be written down, or easily transmitted. It had to be learned through repetition, observation, and the gradual development of what we might call bread intuition. Shaping the dough for different types of bread required specific techniques that varied from region to region within the empire. The distinctive ring shape of simit demanded a particular method of rolling and joining that created the proper proportions and ensured even baking. Pied required careful attention to thickness and edge forming that would create the boat-like shape, while preventing the sides from collapsing during baking. Each bread type carried with it generations of accumulated knowledge about how to work with dough, fire, and time to create the desired result. The baking process itself was a carefully orchestrated dance between baker and oven. Wood-fired ovens required intimate knowledge of how different types of wood burned, how to achieve and maintain proper temperatures, and how to read the subtle signs that indicated when conditions were perfect for different types of bread. The color of the oven walls, the behavior of flames, the sound of water sizzling when sprinkled on the oven floor, all these became part of a complex, sensory vocabulary that experienced bakers used to create consistent results day after day. Regional variations in bread reflected local grains, climate conditions, and cultural preferences that had evolved over centuries. In areas where wheat grew particularly well, breads might be lighter and more refined. In regions where barley or other grains were more common, breakfast breads incorporated these local ingredients, creating flavors and textures that were distinctly tied to place. These variations meant that travelers within the empire could often tell where they were simply by tasting the local bread. The preservation and storage of bread presented particular challenges in the pre-refrigeration era. Families developed sophisticated methods for keeping bread fresh and edible, from wrapping techniques that maintained moisture without encouraging mold, to creative uses for bread that was past its prime. Day-old bread might be sliced and toasted, creating a different texture that was equally valued. Bread that was too hard for direct eating could be softened with tea or milk, ground into breadcrumbs for other uses. The economic aspects of bread in Ottoman society reflected its central importance. Governments carefully regulated the price and quality of bread, understanding that bread shortages or poor quality could destabilize entire communities. Bakers operated under strict guidelines that specified everything from the weight of loaves to the ingredients that could be used. These regulations protected consumers while ensuring that bakers could make sustainable livings from their essential work. As breakfast tables were set each morning across the empire, the bread that anchored each meal carried with it all of these layers of meaning, tradition, and community connection. When family members tore pieces from the morning's loaf, they participated in rituals that connected them to their neighbors, their ancestors, and their understanding of humanity's relationship with the divine. The simple act of breaking bread became a daily affirmation of community, continuity, and gratitude for the mysterious process that transformed grain into sustenance, flour into nourishment, and individual ingredients into the foundation of shared life. Beyond the essential foundation of bread, the Ottoman breakfast table blossomed with the pure, simple flavors that connected each meal to the pastoral landscapes and ancient traditions of the Mediterranean world. Here, in the gentle pairing of white cheese and dark olives, we discover the empire's profound appreciation for foods that required patience, skill, and an understanding of natural processes that could not be hurried or artificially enhanced. White cheese that appeared on virtually every Ottoman breakfast table was not the uniform, processed product of modern dairy systems, but rather a living testament to the relationship between shepherds and their flocks, between seasonal rhythms and human sustenance. This cheese, known by various names throughout the empire, but universally recognized by its pristine white color and delicate, slightly salty flavor, was crafted through methods that had been refined over millennia of Mediterranean cheesemaking. The journey of this cheese began in the highlands, where sheep and goats grazed on wild herbs and mountain grasses, their diet imparting subtle flavors to the milk that would eventually reach the breakfast table. Shepherds, following routes established by their ancestors, would move their flocks according to seasonal patterns that ensured the animals always had access to the best available pasture. This nomadic tradition meant that the milk, and therefore the cheese, carried within it the essence of different landscapes, different seasons, different stages of the natural cycle. The actual process of cheese-making was often a communal activity that brought together extended families or entire villages during peak milk production seasons. Women, typically the guardians of cheese-making knowledge, would gather to transform the day's milk into cheeses that would sustain their families through leaner times. The process required precise timing and intuitive understanding of how factors like temperature, humidity, and the quality of the milk would affect the final product. Fresh cheese, consumed within days of being made, offered a completely different experience from aged varieties. Its texture was soft and almost creamy, with a clean, mild flavor that provided perfect contrast to the sharper tastes of olives and herbs. This fresh cheese would be carefully formed into small rounds or blocks and kept in cool places, often in pottery vessels designed specifically for cheese storage, where it could maintain its delicate character. While developing subtle complexities of flavor, the brining process that preserved many Ottoman cheeses created another dimension of taste and texture. Cheeses stored in salt water developed firmer textures and more pronounced flavors, while remaining perfectly preserved for extended periods. The brine itself became a precious commodity, carefully maintained and sometimes passed between generations. As a starter for new batches, the concentration of salt, the addition of herbs or spices, and the timing of cheese placement all influenced the final product's character. Olives brought to the Ottoman breakfast table an entirely different set of flavors and cultural associations. Where cheese spoke of pastoral life and animal husbandry, olives carried the essence of ancient groves and the patient cultivation of trees that might produce fruit for centuries. The olive trees that dotted the empire's Mediterranean territories were often older than the families that tended them, their gnarled trunks and silvery leaves connecting each generation to those who had planted, pruned, and harvested before them. The varieties of olives available to Ottoman breakfast tables reflected the empire's geographical diversity and the sophisticated agricultural knowledge of its people. Small black olives from mountain groves offered intense, concentrated flavors that could awaken the palate with just a few pieces. Larger green olives, harvested before full ripeness, provided different textures and more delicate tastes that complemented rather than dominated other breakfast elements. The preservation of olives was an art form that required understanding of salt, time, and the natural processes that transformed bitter fresh fruit into the complex, savory delicacies that graced the breakfast table. Different preservation methods created different flavor profiles. Olives cured in dry salt developed different characteristics than those brined in water, while olives preserved with herbs and spices carried additional layers of taste that reflected regional preferences and family traditions. The preparation of olives for the table often involved careful attention to presentation that elevated simple ingredients into elements of beauty. Olives might be arranged in small ceramic smoko bowls, their colors and shapes creating visual appeal that enhanced the eating experience. Some families developed signature methods for preparing olives, perhaps adding specific combinations of herbs, garlic, or citrus that became recognized elements of their breakfast hospitality. The simplicity of cheese and olives on the Ottoman breakfast table reflected deeper cultural values about food, satisfaction, and the good life. Rather than seeking complexity through elaborate preparation or exotic ingredients, Ottoman breakfast culture found richness in the perfect expression of simple elements. This approach required high-quality ingredients and careful attention to their selection, storage, and presentation, but it avoided the complications and pretensions that might distract from the pure pleasure of good food shared with family. Regional variations in cheese and olive preparation created subtle but significant differences in breakfast experiences across the empire. Areas with different climates produced cheeses with different characteristics. Mountain regions might be known for particularly firm, flavorful cheeses, while coastal areas might specialize in varieties that reflected the influence of sea air and different grazing conditions. Similarly, olive varieties and preparation methods varied according to local conditions and cultural preferences. The pairing of cheese and olives with bread created flavor combinations that satisfied both palate and appetite without overwhelming. The senses are creating the heaviness that might interfere with the day's activities. The saltiness of both cheese and olives complemented the mild flavor of bread while providing necessary minerals and fats. The protein in cheese balanced the carbohydrates in bread, creating meals that sustained energy without creating digestive burden. Fresh herbs often accompanied cheese and olives, adding bright flavors and appealing colors to the breakfast presentation. Parsley, dill, mint, and other herbs might be served alongside the main elements or incorporated into cheese preparations. These herbs were typically gathered fresh from household gardens or purchased from early morning markets, ensuring that their flavors were at peak intensity when they reached the breakfast table. The serving vessels used for cheese and olives reflected the Ottoman appreciation for beauty in everyday objects. Small ceramic bowls, often decorated with traditional patterns, held olives in arrangements that pleased the eye as well as the palate. Cheese might be served on wooden boards or pottery plates that had been crafted specifically for food service, their forms designed to enhance both the appearance and accessibility of the food. Water played an important role in the breakfast service, both for cleansing the palate between different flavors and for maintaining the fresh quality of certain foods. Small bowls of clean water might be available for rinsing fingers or for refreshing certain cheeses. The water itself was often flavored with rose water or other subtle enhancements that added another layer of sensory experience too. The timing of cheese and olive service reflected understanding of how flavors developed and changed throughout the meal. Certain cheeses were best enjoyed at the beginning of breakfast, when the palate was most sensitive to subtle flavors. Olives might be saved for later in the meal, when their more intense flavors could provide satisfying contrast to milder elements. This attention to sequence and timing demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how to maximize the pleasure and satisfaction available from simple ingredients. As morning light strengthened and breakfast continued, the simple perfection of cheese, olives, and bread created a foundation of satisfaction that allowed families to begin their day with confidence in their provision and gratitude for the abundance that surrounded them. These foods, requiring no elaborate preparation or expensive ingredients, demonstrated that luxury lay not in complexity or rarity, but in quality, attention, and the wisdom to appreciate the gifts that the natural world provided through human skill and patience, as the savory elements of cheese, olives, and bread established the foundation of the Ottoman breakfast. Sweetness entered the morning meal like sunlight filtering through latticed windows, bringing with it the concentrated essence of orchards and wildflower meadows, of patient preservation and seasonal abundance, captured in ceramic pots and wooden spoons that gleamed with golden viscosity. Honey held a place of particular reverence in Ottoman breakfast culture, not merely as a sweetener, but as a substance that connected the breakfast table to the mysterious world of bees, flowers, and the miraculous transformation of nectar into liquid gold. The honey that graced Ottoman tables was not the uniform, processed product of commercial apiaries, but rather a diverse collection of flavors that reflected the specific flowers, trees, and wild plants that grew within the flight range of different bee colonies. The beekeepers of the Ottoman Empire were artisans who understood their craft as both practical skill and spiritual practice. They knew which locations produced honey with particular characteristics: mountain honey that carried the intense flavors of wild herbs, forest honey dark and complex with the essence of tree blossoms, coastal honey that somehow captured the salt-tinged air of Mediterranean shores. Each type of honey told a story of place and season, of the particular combination of plants that bloomed during specific periods, and the weather conditions that influenced both flowers and bees. The harvest of honey was timed according to natural rhythms rather than commercial convenience. Beekeepers waited for the optimal moment when combs were full, but bees had not yet consumed their stores for winter survival. The extraction process preserved the honey's natural characteristics while ensuring that bee colonies remained healthy and productive. This sustainable approach meant that the same apiaries could produce honey for generations. Creating traditions and reputations that might span centuries, different varieties of honey appeared at different times of year, creating seasonal variety and breakfast sweetness that connected meals to the natural calendar. Spring, honey, light and delicate, reflected the early flowers that marked winter's end. Summer honey grew deeper and more complex as bees gathered nectar from the full abundance of warm weather blooms. Autumn honey carried the concentrated sweetness of late-season flowers and the urgent energy of bees preparing for winter dormancy. The presentation of honey at the breakfast table was itself a small ceremony. The honey pot, often made of glazed ceramic or carved wood, might be warmed slightly to enhance its flowing properties and release its aromatic compounds. Wooden spoons, seasoned by years of honey service, were preferred for serving because they did not conduct heat or cold and would not interfere with the honey's natural flavors. The act of drizzling honey over bread or cheese became a meditation on abundance, sweetness, and the generous creativity of the natural world. Fruit preserves brought another dimension of sweetness to Ottoman breakfast tables, presenting human skill in capturing and concentrating the fleeting pleasures of seasonal fruits. The making of preserves was a high art that required precise understanding of sugar concentrations, cooking temperatures, and timing that could not be learned from books but only through experience and careful observation of how fruits behaved. Under different conditions, the selection of fruits for preserve making followed the empire's agricultural calendar and reflected the sophisticated knowledge of Ottoman cooks about which varieties of fruits preserved well and which methods best maintained their essential characteristics. Apricots, with their perfect balance of sweetness and acidity, created preserves of unparalleled smoothness and flavor. Quince, too hard and astringent to eat fresh, transformed through careful cooking into ruby-colored preserves with complex, wine-like flavors that epitomize the alchemy of skilled food preparation. Rose petal preserves represented perhaps the most refined expression of Ottoman preserve making, transforming the ephemeral beauty and fragrance of roses into a concentrated essence that could bring the memory of spring gardens to winter breakfast tables. The preparation of rose preserves required roses gathered at exactly the right moment, when their fragrance was most intense, but before their petals began to fade. The cooking process had to preserve not only the rose's flavor, but also their delicate texture and natural color. Citrus preserves brought bright, awakening flavors to winter mornings when fresh fruits were not available. Orange and lemon preserves, made from fruits that grew in the empire's warmer regions, carried vitamin-rich nutrition, as well as flavors that could awaken sleepy palates and provide energizing starts to cold weather days. The preparation of citrus preserves often involved the entire fruit, including peels that contained aromatic oils and pectin that helped create proper consistency. The cooking of preserves was typically done in large batches that required coordination between multiple family members. The fruits had to be prepared simultaneously, washed, sorted, and cut, according to specific requirements for each type of preserve. Sugar had to be measured carefully and heated to precise temperatures. The cooking process itself required constant attention to prevent burning while ensuring that the preserves reached the proper concentration for long-term storage. The testing of preserve consistency was a skill that developed over years of experience. Cooks learned to recognize the visual signs that indicated when preserves had reached the proper concentration, the way the mixture behaved when stirred, the sound it made while cooking, the appearance of the surface when a small amount was placed on a cool plate. These subtle indicators could not be measured with instruments, but required the intuitive knowledge that came from repeated practice. Storage of preserves required containers and techniques that would maintain their quality through months or even years of keeping. Ceramic crocks with tight-fitting lids, glass jars sealed with wax, and other traditional preservation methods ensured that the concentrated sweetness of summer and autumn fruits could brighten breakfast tables throughout the darker months. The arrangement of preserved containers in household storage areas became a visible reminder of abundance and foresight. Grape molasses, known as pekmaz, provided another form of concentrated sweetness that reflected the empire's viticultural expertise. Made by slowly cooking grape juice until it reduced to a thick, dark syrup. Pekmaz concentrated not only sweetness, but also the minerals and complex flavors that made it a nutritious as well as delicious breakfast element. The preparation of pekmaz required perfect grapes and careful attention to cooking, temperatures that would concentrate flavors without creating bitterness. The serving of sweet elements during breakfast followed customs that balanced indulgence with restraint. Sweetness was appreciated and enjoyed, but not to excess that might overwhelm other flavors or create the energy fluctuations that could interfere with the day's activities. Children learned to appreciate sweetness as one element among many developing palates that could enjoy intense flavors without requiring them as the dominant note in every meal. Regional specialties and sweet breakfast elements reflected local agricultural conditions and cultural preferences that had evolved over generations. Areas known for particular fruits developed signature preserves that became sought after throughout the empire. Mountain regions might be famous for specific types of honey, while coastal areas developed preserves that took advantage of fruits that grew well in maritime climates. The combination of different sweet elements allowed for complex flavor experiences that changed throughout the breakfast meal. A spoonful of tart apricot preserve might be followed by the floral complexity of honey, creating taste sensations that were more interesting and satisfying than any single sweetener could provide. This approach to sweetness demonstrated sophisticated understanding of how flavors could complement and enhance each other, rather than simply competing for attention. The preparation and serving of sweet breakfast elements also provided opportunities for hospitality and gift-giving that strengthened social relationships. Families might be known for particular preserves or honey sources, and sharing these special foods became a way of expressing friendship and respect. The gift of a jar of homemade preserves carried implications of time, skill, and caring that mass-produced alternatives could never match. As the morning meal progressed and various sweet elements appeared and disappeared from the breakfast table, they created a symphony of flavors that connected each meal to the larger rhythms of agricultural life, seasonal change, and human skill in preserving and presenting the natural world's sweetest gifts. The sweetness was never cloying or artificial, but rather a celebration of abundance, craftsmanship, and the generous spirit that transformed simple fruits and honey into concentrated expressions of joy and gratitude. The aroma that would come to define Ottoman morning culture did not arrive in the empire until the middle of the 16th century. Yet once coffee established itself in the breakfast rituals of the Ottoman world, it transformed not only the morning meal but the very rhythm of daily social life. To understand the role of coffee in Ottoman breakfast is to witness the birth of a cultural institution that would spread from the hills of Yemen to the courts of Europe, carrying with it new concepts of leisure, conversation, and the pleasures of careful preparation before coffee became the ubiquitous morning companion we know today. Ottoman breakfasts were accompanied by different beverages that reflected older traditions and local preferences. Herbal teas brewed from chamomile, mint, and sage provided gentle awakening for the digestive system, while offering subtle flavors that complemented rather than competed with food. These teas were often sweetened with honey and served in small glasses that allowed drinkers to appreciate both color and warmth while sipping slowly throughout the meal. The arrival of coffee in Ottoman culture coincided with the empire's expansion into the Arabian Peninsula, where Yemeni traders had been cultivating and consuming coffee for generations. The first coffee beans to reach Istanbul traveled along trade routes that connected the empire's far-flung territories, carried by merchants who understood that they were transporting not merely a new commodity, but a completely new category of human experience. The initial reaction to coffee in Ottoman society was mixed, with some religious authorities questioning whether this new beverage fell within acceptable Islamic guidelines and others recognizing its potential to enhance rather than diminish spiritual and intellectual life. The debates surrounding coffee's acceptability reflected the empire's careful approach to innovation. weighing new possibilities against established traditions while remaining open to beneficial changes that could enrich. Ottoman culture, the preparation of coffee in the Ottoman Empire developed into an art form that required specialized equipment, fine techniques, and patient attention to details that could dramatically influence the final result. The coffee beans themselves were selected with care, often purchased green and roasted in small batches to ensure optimal freshness and flavor. The roasting process required understanding of how heat transformed the beans' internal chemistry, creating the complex flavors and aromatic compounds that made coffee so appealing. The grinding of coffee beans was performed immediately before brewing, using hand-operated mills that produced powder fine enough to create the characteristic texture of Ottoman coffee. This ultra-fine grind was essential for the brewing method that developed in Ottoman kitchens, where coffee, water, and sugar were combined in small pots and heated slowly over low fires until the mixture reached the perfect balance of strength, sweetness, and foam. The sezd, the small pot used for brewing Ottoman coffee, became an essential piece of kitchen equipment whose design reflected centuries of refinement in pursuit of perfect coffee preparation. Made from copper, brass, or silver depending on the household's means, the sez's shape and proportions were carefully calibrated to promote proper heat distribution and foam development. The long handle allowed precise control over the brewing process while keeping the cook's hand safely away from the heat source. The brewing process itself became a morning meditation that required complete attention and could not be hurried or performed carelessly. The coffee, water, and sugar were combined in precise proportions and heated slowly, with the brewer watching for subtle changes in color, aroma, and surface behavior that indicated different stages of the process. The goal was to create coffee with a layer of fine foam on top, a sign of proper preparation that enhanced both appearance and flavor. The serving of coffee followed elaborate protocols that reflected its status as a luxury item and its role in social relationships. Coffee was served in small cups, often made of fine porcelain and sometimes nestled in decorative holders made of precious metals. The cups were filled carefully to preserve the foam layer and served immediately while the coffee was at optimal temperature and the aromatic compounds were at peak intensity. The introduction of coffee to Ottoman breakfast culture created new social dynamics that extended the morning meal beyond simple nutrition into realms of conversation, contemplation, and community bonding. Unlike tea, which could be consumed casually throughout the meal, coffee demanded attention and respect. Its preparation created natural pauses in breakfast activities, moments when family members gathered around the brewing pot and shared the anticipation of the first cup. The stimulating effects of coffee aligned perfectly with Ottoman breakfast's role in preparing people for the day's activities, unlike the heavy, sleep-inducing breakfasts of some other cultures. Ottoman morning meals aimed to energize without overwhelming, to awaken both body and mind for the work, worship, and social engagement that filled Ottoman days. Coffee's ability to enhance mental alertness while providing pleasure made it an ideal complement to this approach. Regional variations in coffee preparation reflected local preferences and the adaptation of basic techniques to different conditions and tastes. Some areas developed preferences for stronger or weaker coffee, while others incorporated different amounts of sugar or experimented with adding spices like cardamom or cinnamon. These variations created subtle but meaningful differences in breakfast experiences across the empire's diverse territories. The economics of coffee consumption reflected its status as both luxury and necessity in Ottoman society. While coffee beans were expensive enough that coffee remained a special treat for most families, its importance in social and business relationships made it a worthwhile investment for households that could afford it. The ability to serve good coffee became a mark of hospitality and social status that influenced how families allocated their food budgets. Women played crucial roles in the development and maintenance of coffee culture within Ottoman households. The preparation of coffee required skills that were passed from mother to daughter, creating traditions of excellence that became family signatures. The quality of a household's coffee service reflected the knowledge and attention of the women who oversaw its preparation. making coffee preparation an important domestic art. The storage and preservation of coffee required understanding of how various factors affected its quality over time. Coffee beans had to be protected from moisture, light, and air, while being kept accessible for daily use. Ground coffee deteriorated quickly, so most households ground only what was needed for immediate use. The containers used for coffee storage were chosen and maintained carefully to preserve the beans. Essential characteristics. Coffee's role in Ottoman breakfast. Gradually expanded beyond the morning meal to become an integral part of social and business relationships throughout Ottoman society. The skills developed in household coffee. Preparation provided foundations for the elaborate coffee service that would characterize Ottoman hospitality in more formal settings. The morning coffee shared among family members became training for the coffee service that would welcome guests and cement social bonds. The spread of coffee culture from household breakfasts to public coffee houses represented one of the Ottoman Empire's most significant cultural innovations. The techniques and appreciation for coffee that developed around breakfast tables provided the knowledge base for commercial coffee service that would create new forms of public gathering and social interaction. The coffee house, as a social institution, grew directly from the coffee culture that first flourished in Ottoman homes, as coffee established itself as an essential element of Ottoman breakfast. It created new rhythms and expectations that shaped how families structured their morning activities. The time required for proper coffee preparation and consumption meant that breakfasts became more leisurely affairs, creating space for conversation and connection that might otherwise be rushed or omitted entirely. Coffee transformed breakfast from simple refueling into a social and sensory experience that enhanced family relationships while preparing everyone for the day ahead. The legacy of Ottoman coffee culture extends far beyond the breakfast table, influencing coffee preparation and appreciation throughout the world. The careful attention to preparation, the emphasis on quality ingredients, and the understanding of coffee as both pleasure and social catalyst that developed in Ottoman breakfast culture provided models that continue to influence how coffee is prepared and consumed today. As dawn broke across the vast expanse of the Ottoman Empire, from the windswept shores of the Black Sea to the sun-baked valleys of the Arabian Peninsula, each region awakened to its own interpretation of the morning meal, creating a magnificent tapestry of breakfast traditions that reflected local ingredients, climate conditions, and cultural influences while maintaining the essential Ottoman character that united this diverse realm under a single imperial identity. In the rolling hills of Anatolia, where wheat fields stretched toward distant mountains and shepherds guided their flocks along ancient paths, breakfast reflected the pastoral abundance of a landscape that had nurtured civilizations for millennia. Here, the morning meal might begin with thick, creamy yogurt made from the milk of sheep that grazed on wild herbs and mountain grasses, their diet imparting subtle flavors that transformed simple dairy into a complex, satisfying foundation for the day's first sustenance. Anatolian breakfast tables displayed the region's agricultural wealth through arrays of fresh cheeses that varied from village to village, each reflecting the specific characteristics of local milk, traditional preparation methods, and aging techniques that had been refined over generations. The cheese might be accompanied by honey gathered from mountainside apiaries where bees collected nectar from wildflowers that bloomed in carefully tended meadows, creating honey with floral notes that could not be replicated in any other environment. The bread of Anatolia carried the hearty character of a region that understood the importance of substantial nutrition for people, whose days involved physical labor and challenging terrain. Thick, dense loaves with crusts darkened by wood-fired ovens provided lasting energy, while their chewy interiors offered satisfying texture that complemented the region's rich dairy products. The baking process often involved communal ovens that served entire neighborhoods, creating social connections that strengthened community bonds while ensuring that everyone had access to properly baked bread. Moving northward into the Balkan territories, where Ottoman rule brought together Slavic, Greek, and Turkish influences. Breakfast traditions reflected this. Cultural convergence through foods that blended techniques and ingredients from multiple traditions. The morning meal might include filo pastries filled with cheese and herbs, their paper-thin layers requiring skills that were passed carefully from generation to generation and creating textures that seemed almost impossibly delicate, yet satisfyingly. Substantial Balkan breakfast tables often featured preserved vegetables that reflected the region's need to store nutrition through long, cold winters. Pickled peppers, fermented cabbage, and preserved tomatoes provided acidic counterpoints too. Rich cheeses and breads while supplying essential vitamins during seasons when fresh produce was not available. These preservation techniques represented sophisticated understanding of fermentation and pickling that ensured food safety while creating complex, appealing flavors. The mountainous regions of the Balkans developed breakfast traditions that emphasized foods capable of providing sustained energy for people whose daily activities might involve hiking across difficult terrain or working in challenging weather conditions. Hearty porridges made from local grains, enhanced with nuts, dried fruits, and honey, created morning meals that could sustain energy levels through long periods of physical activity while providing the comfort and warmth needed during cold mountain mornings. In the coastal regions of the Aegean and Mediterranean, where Ottoman territories embraced both shores of these ancient seas, breakfast traditions celebrated the abundance of maritime environments through foods that reflected both the sea's bounty and the fertility of coastal plains. Fresh fish, prepared simply with olive oil and herbs, might appear alongside traditional bread and cheese, creating protein-rich morning meals that provided excellent nutrition for people whose livelihoods depended on fishing, shipping, or coastal agriculture. The olive groves that characterized much of the empire's Mediterranean coastline provided not only olives for the breakfast table, but also the high-quality olive oil that enhanced virtually every element of the morning meal. This oil, pressed from olives that grew in groves, some of which dated back to antiquity, carried complex flavors that reflected specific soil conditions, climate patterns, and traditional processing methods that preserved the oil's natural characteristics. While creating products of exceptional quality, islands throughout the Ottoman Mediterranean developed their own distinctive breakfast variations that reflected their isolation, maritime orientation, and unique combinations of influences from passing traders and settlers. These island breakfasts might include foods not found elsewhere in the empire, such as specific varieties of cheese made from the milk of goats that grazed on wild herbs found only on particular islands, or honey made by bees that collected nectar from endemic plants that grew nowhere else. The Levanten provinces, where Ottoman rule encompassed some of the world's most ancient centers of agriculture and trade, brought to the imperial breakfast table traditions that predated Islam, Christianity, and even the classical civilizations of Greece and Rome. In Damascus, Aleppo, and Jerusalem, breakfast might include flatbreads whose preparation methods had been refined over thousands of years, creating textures and flavors that represented the accumulated wisdom of countless generations of bakers. Levanten breakfast traditions often emphasized fresh herbs that grew abundantly in the region's favorable climate and fertile soils. Parsley, mint thyme, and other aromatic plants appeared not as garnishes, but as substantial elements of the morning meal, providing intense flavors and important nutrients while connecting each breakfast to the agricultural abundance that made the Levant one of the empire's most prosperous regions. The spice markets of cities like Damascus and Aleppo influenced local breakfast traditions through access to seasonings and flavorings that were rare or expensive in other parts of the empire. This access allowed Levantine cooks to develop breakfast preparations that incorporated subtle spicing techniques, creating foods with complex flavor profiles that reflected the region's position at the center of international trade networks. In the Arabian territories, where Ottoman rule extended into landscapes that had witnessed the birth of Islam and the development of Arab culinary traditions, breakfast reflected the austere beauty and practical necessities of desert life. The morning meal emphasized foods that could provide sustained nutrition and hydration, in challenging climatic conditions while maintaining the spiritual and social significance that marked all Ottoman breakfast traditions. Arabian breakfast often featured dates, whose concentrated sweetness and dense nutrition made them ideal for people whose daily activities might involve long periods without access to food or water. These dates, grown in oases where careful irrigation and generations of agricultural knowledge created abundance in seemingly impossible conditions, provided quick energy while their natural preservative qualities ensured they remained safe and nutritious even in extreme heat. The coffee culture that would eventually spread throughout the Ottoman Empire originated in these Arabian territories, where the preparation and consumption of coffee had developed into sophisticated social rituals. Long before the beverage reached other parts of the Ottoman world, Arabian breakfast coffee service included elaborate preparation ceremonies and serving protocols that emphasized hospitality, respect, and the social bonds that were essential for survival in harsh desert environments. In North African territories where Ottoman rule brought together Arab, Berber, and Mediterranean influences, breakfast traditions reflected this cultural diversity. While adapting to local climate conditions and agricultural possibilities, the morning meal might include couscous preparations that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of grain processing and cooking techniques, creating foods that were both nutritious and perfectly adapted to North African environmental conditions. North African breakfast tables often featured preserved lemons and other pickled citrus fruits that provided essential vitamin C while adding bright, awakening flavors to morning meals. These preservation techniques allowed families to maintain nutrition through seasons, and fresh fruits were not available, while creating condiments that enhanced other breakfast elements through their acidic intensity and complex flavors. Tagines and other cooking vessels that characterized North African cuisine influenced breakfast preparation through cooking methods that maximized flavor development while minimizing fuel consumption. These techniques created breakfast foods with concentrated tastes and appealing textures while reflecting the practical necessities of cooking in environments where fuel was scarce and valuable. Despite these regional variations, certain elements remained consistent across all Ottoman breakfast traditions, creating a sense of imperial unity that transcended geographic and cultural differences. The emphasis on bread, cheese, and olives provided common foundations that any Ottoman citizen would recognize and appreciate regardless of their specific regional background. The importance placed on family gathering, proper preparation, and gratitude for daily sustenance created shared values that strengthened imperial identity while respecting local diversity. The trade networks that connected all parts of the Ottoman Empire allowed for the gradual exchange of breakfast traditions and ingredients, creating a slow but steady evolution toward greater integration while preserving distinctive regional characteristics. A spice that originated in Arabian territories might gradually become popular in Balkan breakfast preparations, while a cheese-making technique developed in Anatolia might eventually influence practices in North African provinces. As the sun reached its full morning strength across these diverse territories, the breakfast tables that were being cleared in preparation for the day's activities represented not only the nutritional needs and cultural preferences of different regions, but also the remarkable achievement of an empire that could maintain unity while celebrating diversity, creating common cause while respecting local tradition, and building lasting institutional strength through the simple daily practice of sharing morning meals that honored both imperial identity and regional character. Within the marble corridors and silk-draped chambers of Topkapi Palace, where the Sultan's residence overlooked the convergence of Europe and Asia across the glittering waters of the Bosphorus, breakfast became something far more elaborate than simple morning sustenance. Here, in the heart of Ottoman power, the morning meal transformed into an intricate ceremony that reflected the empire's wealth, sophistication, and the complex protocols that governed life at the highest levels of imperial society. The palace kitchens, a vast complex of specialized cooking spaces that could feed thousands of people daily, began their breakfast preparations, while the city still slept beneath a canopy of stars. Master chefs, each responsible for specific aspects of the morning meal, coordinated their activities with the precision of military commanders, ensuring that every element of the Sultan's breakfast would be perfect in timing, temperature, and presentation. When the moment arrived for the morning service, the Sultan's personal breakfast service began with an elaborate ritual of tasting and approval that ensured both safety and quality. Selected servants, whose loyalty had been tested through years of service, would sample each dish before it was approved for the imperial table. This process was not merely about preventing poison, though security concerns were real, but also about maintaining the standards of excellence that befitted the ruler of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. The serving vessels used for palace breakfast reflected the empire's artistic achievements and international connections through materials and craftsmanship that represented the finest available anywhere in the world. Porcelain from China, silver from the empire's own mines, crystal from Venice, and locally crafted ceramics decorated with patterns that had been refined over generations created table settings that were themselves works of art worthy of preservation. In their own right, the selection of foods for the Sultan's breakfast demonstrated the empire's ability to gather the finest ingredients from across its territories and beyond. Honey might arrive from the mountain apiaries of Anatolia, known for producing varieties with specific floral notes that could not be found elsewhere. Cheese could come from the highlands of the Balkans, where traditional methods created products of exceptional quality and character. Fresh fruits might be transported from the fertile valleys of the Levant, arriving at the palace while still carrying the morning dew of their harvest. The bread served at the Sultan's table represented the pinnacle of Ottoman baking artistry, with master bakers creating varieties specifically for palace service that demonstrated techniques and ingredients not available to ordinary citizens. These breads might incorporate rare spices, be shaped into elaborate forms that required exceptional skill, or be prepared using methods that demanded time and attention that only palace resources could support. Coffee service in the palace developed into an elaborate ceremony that elevated the simple preparation of the morning beverage into a performance art that impressed foreign dignitaries while demonstrating Ottoman mastery of this relatively new addition to breakfast culture. Specially trained coffee servants prepared the morning's first cups, using techniques that had been refined to achieve perfect consistency, flavor, and presentation that reflected the empire's commitment to excellence in all aspects of imperial life. The timing of palace breakfast service coordinated with the Sultan's prayer obligations and administrative responsibilities, creating a schedule that balanced spiritual duties with the practical necessities of governing a vast empire. The meal itself provided opportunities for informal consultation with advisors, the review of important documents, and the kind of thoughtful consideration that major decisions required but that formal audiences might not allow. The spatial arrangements for palace breakfast reflected Ottoman understanding of hierarchy, privacy, and the ceremonial importance of shared meals in maintaining relationships among the elite. Different levels of the imperial household, the Sultan's immediate family, high-ranking officials, palace servants had their own breakfast services that reflected their positions while maintaining connections to the central authority that unified the entire system. Female members of the imperial household, residing in the carefully protected quarters of the harem, had their own elaborate breakfast traditions that combined privacy requirements with the luxury and sophistication expected for women of such high status. These breakfast services might feature delicacies specifically chosen for their appeal to feminine tastes, served in settings designed to provide comfort and beauty while maintaining the security that palace life required. The seasonal variation in palace breakfast reflected the empire's agricultural calendar and the importance of celebrating abundance while acknowledging the natural rhythms that governed all life, even at the highest levels of society. Spring breakfast might emphasize fresh herbs and early fruits that symbolized renewal and growth. Summer could bring elaborate fruit displays that demonstrated the empire's prosperity. Autumn breakfast might feature preserved foods that showed appreciation for harvest abundance, while winter meals could emphasize stored delicacies that proved the palace's ability to maintain luxury even during challenging seasons. Special occasion breakfast in the palace marked religious holidays, celebrations, and important events with elaborate services that exceeded even the normal standards of imperial dining. These occasions might feature foods prepared according to ancient recipes, dishes that required exceptional skill or rare ingredients, or presentations that demonstrated particular aspects of Ottoman cultural achievement to visiting dignitaries. From other powers, the education of young princes and princesses included careful instruction in proper breakfast behavior, table manners, and appreciation for the foods and service that their positions made possible. These lessons were not merely about etiquette, but about understanding the responsibilities that came with privilege. The importance of showing proper respect for those who served them. The connection between personal conduct and imperial dignity. The palace breakfast service provided employment for hundreds of specialized workers, whose skills and loyalty were essential elements of the system that maintained imperial power and prestige. From the buyers who selected ingredients in distant markets to the servants who cleaned the elaborate serving vessels after each meal. The breakfast service created a complex economy of expertise and dependence that strengthened palace operations, while providing livelihoods for skilled workers. Foreign ambassadors and visiting dignitaries often experienced Ottoman palace breakfast as part of diplomatic protocols designed to impress them with imperial wealth and sophistication, while demonstrating Ottoman mastery of the hospitality arts that were so important in international relations. These breakfast services became forms of soft diplomacy that could influence negotiations and relationships without the formal constraints that governed official meetings. The records kept of palace breakfast services provide historians with detailed information about Ottoman court life, economic conditions, and cultural preferences that would be difficult to reconstruct from other sources. These records show the evolution of taste, the introduction of new foods and preparation methods, and the ways that external influences gradually modified traditional Ottoman breakfast culture even at the highest levels of society. The contrast between palace breakfast luxury and the simpler morning meals of ordinary Ottoman citizens was dramatic, yet both shared fundamental characteristics that reflected common cultural values about family gathering, gratitude for sustenance, and the proper way to begin each day. Even the most elaborate palace breakfast maintained the basic structure of bread, dairy, and accompaniments that characterized Ottoman breakfast culture throughout the empire. The influence of palace breakfast culture gradually spread beyond the palace walls through former servants who carried knowledge of palace methods to other households. Through the adoption of palace-inspired serving vessels and preparation techniques by wealthy merchants and officials, and through the general cultural prestige that attached to anything associated with imperial practice, the decline of the Ottoman Empire eventually led to the simplification of palace breakfast traditions. But the records and artifacts that survive from the height of imperial power provide detailed evidence of how the morning meal could become an elaborate art form when resources, skill, and cultural commitment combined to create experiences that transcended simple nutrition and became expressions of aesthetic achievement, social sophistication, and imperial grandeur. As morning light filled the palace courtyards and the breakfast service concluded, the cleaned vessels were stored away, and the kitchen staff began preparations for the day's subsequent meals. But the memory of the morning ceremony remained as a daily reminder of the standards of excellence, attention to detail, and respect for tradition that characterized Ottoman civilization at its peak. When even the simple act of breaking the night's fast became an opportunity to demonstrate the values and achievements that defined one of history's great empires, in the quiet corners of abandoned libraries, between the yellowed pages of family recipe collections that no living person remembers how to read, and within the fading memories of elderly cooks whose knowledge dies with them, there exist the ghostly remains of Ottoman breakfast dishes that once graced morning tables across the empire but have since vanished as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only tantalizing references and the melancholy awareness of culinary traditions that time has claimed forever. Among these lost treasures was a preparation known as Sultan's Tears, a delicate cheese preparation that required a specific type of goat's milk available. only during certain seasons, and a curdling process that involved morning dew collected from particular mountain meadows. The technique for making this cheese was so specialized, and the ingredients so specific, that when the last master cheesemaker who knew the method died without passing on the knowledge, the dish disappeared entirely, surviving only in palace records that describe its ethereal texture and incomparable flavor. Without providing enough detail for modern reconstruction, the breakfast archives also speak of elaborate bread sculptures that were created for special occasions. Breads shaped into intricate forms representing flowers, animals, or geometric patterns that required not only exceptional baking skills, but also artistic talent and mathematical understanding. These ceremonial breads were not merely decorative, but were designed to be eaten as part of elaborate breakfast presentations that combined visual beauty with culinary excellence. The techniques for creating these edible artworks were closely guarded secrets of master bakers. And when social changes disrupted the apprenticeship systems that transmitted such knowledge, the skills simply vanished. One of the most intriguing lost dishes was a fermented grain preparation called Dawn's Breath, which required a specific combination of grains that were sprouted under controlled conditions, then fermented using a starter culture that was maintained continuously by families who specialized in its production.
Oh.
The resulting porridge-like dish was said to have remarkable nutritional properties and a complex wine-like flavor that improved with age. The preparation took weeks to complete and required knowledge of fermentation science that was understood intuitively by traditional practitioners, but was never written down in forms that modern cooks can interpret. Historical accounts describe breakfast pastries filled with combinations of ingredients that seem almost mythical today, rose petals preserved in honey from bees that fed exclusively on specific wildflowers, nuts from trees that grew only in certain valleys, spices that were available only through trade relationships that no longer exist. These pastries required preparation techniques that demanded perfect timing, precise temperature control, and an understanding of how different ingredients behaved together that could only be gained through years of careful study under master practitioners. The beverage traditions of Ottoman breakfast included drinks that have completely disappeared from modern consumption, such as a morning tea made from the leaves of a specific variety of mint that grew wild in certain regions but has since been displaced by agricultural development. This tea was prized for its ability to provide gentle energy without the intensity of coffee, and its preparation involved drying and aging techniques that created complex flavors impossible to achieve with fresh leaves. When the wild mint habitats were destroyed and cultivation attempts failed, the tea simply ceased to exist. Some lost dishes disappeared because they required ingredients that are no longer available due to environmental changes or economic shifts. A breakfast soup made from a particular variety of lentils that grew only in specific soil conditions was prized for its creamy texture and nutty flavor. But when agricultural practices changed and the traditional growing areas were converted to other crops, the lentils vanished, and with them the knowledge of how to prepare the soup that had been a breakfast staple in certain regions for centuries. The imperial kitchens developed breakfast preparations that required teams of specialists working in coordination. Dishes so complex that they could only be created in environments where multiple experts could collaborate over extended periods. One such dish was an elaborate egg preparation that involved timing the cooking of eggs from different types of birds, chickens, ducks, quails, and others, so that they all reached perfect doneness simultaneously, then combining them with sauces and accompaniments that required their own complex preparation schedules. When the palace kitchen system was dismantled, the organizational knowledge needed to coordinate such elaborate preparations was lost, along with the recipes themselves. Regional specialties often disappeared when political changes disrupted the communities that maintained them. A breakfast dish from the empire's eastern territories involved a particular method of smoking cheese, using wood from trees that grew only at specific altitudes, combined with a preparation technique that required the cooperation of entire village communities. When population movements and political upheavals scattered these communities, the collective knowledge needed to produce the dish was lost, and no individual possessed enough of the specialized information to recreate it elsewhere. Archaeological evidence suggests the existence of breakfast foods that required cooking equipment no longer used or understood. Excavations of Ottoman-era kitchens have revealed specialized vessels and tools whose purposes can only be guessed at, suggesting preparation methods that created foods with textures and flavors that modern techniques cannot replicate. Without understanding how these tools were used, the dishes they created remain permanently inaccessible. Their recipes as mysterious as ancient languages that no one remembers how to speak. Some breakfast traditions disappeared because they were so closely associated with social or economic systems that no longer exist. A fermented milk drink that was prepared by nomadic herders required constant movement and specific environmental conditions that could only be maintained by people following traditional seasonal migration patterns. When these pastoral lifestyles were disrupted by modern borders and agricultural development, the knowledge of how to maintain the fermentation cultures and create the drink was lost, along with the social structures that had supported it. The spice combinations used in certain Ottoman breakfast preparations often depended on trade relationships that provided access to specific varieties of seasonings from particular regions. When political changes disrupted these trade networks, or when the sources of certain spices were lost to natural disasters or agricultural changes, the recipes that depended on them became impossible to prepare authentically. Modern attempts to recreate these dishes using substitute ingredients produce results that may be delicious but bear little resemblance to the original preparations. Family recipe collections that survived in private hands often contain references to breakfast dishes whose names are preserved, but whose preparation methods are described in terms that assumed knowledge no longer available to modern readers. Recipes that call for grandmother's starter, the usual morning spice mixture, or prepared according to the traditional method, provide tantalizing hints about lost foods without supplying enough information for successful recreation. Seasonal timing that governed certain breakfast preparations often depended on natural phenomena that are no longer reliable due to climate changes or environmental degradation. A breakfast dish that required harvesting specific ingredients during a narrow window when certain plants bloomed and particular weather conditions prevailed. This became impossible to prepare when environmental changes altered the timing of natural cycles that the recipe depended on. Modern attempts to reconstruct lost Ottoman breakfast dishes face the challenge of interpreting historical references without access to the oral traditions that provided essential details not recorded in written recipes. Food historians and experimental cooks work with incomplete information, trying to reverse engineer preparation methods from descriptions of finished dishes or archaeological evidence of cooking techniques, but their efforts can only approximate what the original foods might have been like.